already who are turning on to our broadcast. We're about to go live. Actually, we did go live. We're about to introduce our guests momentarily. This is the Never Again Live podcast brought to you by Israel Now. And without any further ado, we're going to get started in about 10 seconds. Thank you for those of you who already turned on. This is Never Again Live podcast series brought to you by Israel Now. You can watch us on Twitter, which is now X, or YouTube or Facebook. Please start sharing this as soon as you're on. Share it with your friends and colleagues. It's Mayor Halevi Weinstein is the host, hiding out in the corner here. You have Dr. B in the South Texas studios. That's me, by the way. I'm the silent partner, and after the intro, I'll be pretty silent. We also have a special guest, Mayor Jolovitz, who's the past national executive director of the ZOA, as well as a past national chairman of the Jewish Defense League. Basically, we're a small group of unapologetic conservative Zionists who get to say whatever we want because it's our show. Tonight's show is a special edition talking about the tunnels which are heading to Gaza from Egypt. The government of Egypt prevents the entry of Palestinian refugees into the country unless they pay tens of thousands of dollars. I don't blame them for blocking the refugees. And they're talking about this impenetrable Egypt-Gaza wall, as we can see here in this photograph. It's true, you can't get over the wall. So meanwhile, while they talk about this wall, weapons provided to Hamas from Iran have been flowing freely from Egypt to Gaza through a massive, well-constructed tunnel system large enough to accommodate delivery trucks and terrorists. So what good is a wall if you go underneath it? So the weapons have been coming from Iran to Egypt, to the Muslim Brotherhood, to Hamas. These massive, unobstructed, fortified two-way corridors constructed by the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas are right under the noses of the Egyptian authorities, who would not have been possible to do this if the Egyptian government were honoring the Camp David Accords. So now what? And that's the issue of tonight's program. What are we going to do now? What is Israel going to do now? The Camp David Accords, and there's the Kodak moment with Sadat, Begin, and Jimmy Carter, another anti-Semite on the scene. So now they can be proud of the accomplishments of Gaza. Will the war in Gaza be the end of the Camp David Accords? So there they are in one of the tunnels. I think they kind of had tunnel vision from the start. So Gaza's to the right, Egypt's to the left. And meanwhile, the hostages are stuck somewhere in the middle while the terrorists freely flow with the weapons from Egypt into Gaza. Einstein said the world's a dangerous place, not because of those who do evil, but because of those who look on and do nothing. At israelnow.ca, we don't look on and do nothing. We're active. And please do join us in our fight against anti-Semitism. I'm going to bring our guests on the screen, and I'll see you all later.
Thank you very much, Gary, for that introduction. Let me first, before we start, call on our viewers, our friends, our supporters, if you could please share this with the various platforms that you're on, be it Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, email lists. We'd appreciate it. We'll reach a lot more people. This is being broadcast live from Twitter, our YouTube channel, from our Facebook page, also on our website, israelnow.ca. Thank you for joining us. We're living in historic times right now. There was an announcement from 3 countries to recognize Palestine. Just the other day, the ICC accused Israel of a policy of extermination. In other words, equating the state of Israel with Nazi Germany. Israel has uncovered tunnels that you could drive trucks through. Tunnels on the border between Gaza and the Sinai, controlled by Egypt, in direct violation of the Camp David Accords. There are so many Jews who had a vision of a 2-state solution. And unfortunately, the Arabs who promote a Palestine want to have a Palestine instead of any kind of Jewish state. And that was the issue from day one. I'm going to bring on Mayor Jolwitz to join me, former national chairman of the Jewish Defense League. And he's been involved in the Jewish community for so many years, advocating for Israel and Jewish rights. And we're going to be discussing the core issue and what Jews should be very concerned with right now as we move forward. Mayor, how are you?
I'm well, given circumstances. Thank you.
Absolutely. Mayor, when you see these tunnels being discovered, and the size of them, too, that you could drive trucks, and the amount of them, approximately 50 tunnels on the border of Sinai/Egypt, Gaza. What comes to mind? We remember our rabbi was very clear back then when Menachem Begin was prime minister and was meeting with the president of Egypt, Anwar Sadat, and Jimmy Carter was the president of the United States. And they were telling Israel to give up the Sinai and there will be peace. Everything will be great. We'll have the Camp David Accords. And our rabbi was very clear about it. In fact, he was one of the last Jews to be dragged out of a Jewish town in the Sinai, Yamit. And the slogan was not 1 inch. And in fact, just a few years before that, the slogan of Menachem Begin was not 1 inch, but Menachem Begin gave in and gave it up. And here we are today, and it's what we see. What can you say?
Two comments, interrelated, and I guess we'll address each at its own time during this 1 hour. The first is the subject matter that you've posted. Will the war in Gaza be the end of the Camp David Accords? And I think more accurately is that the war in Gaza has exposed that the Camp David Accords died a long time ago. It's a done deal. It's a fait accompli. Mm-hmm. We are now only beginning to recognize it. And we should have recognized it a long time ago as well. Those who pervade the political philosophy that we do understood this a long time ago. And a couple of quick comments and we'll connect the dots. The fact that Egypt was considered a friend at peace with Israel was sort of nonsensical. The Egyptians never agreed to have a de jure peace with Israel, which is recognize Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state, but rather they said that they had a de facto peace agreement with Israel, which meant that they recognized Israel having existed, in fact. Two very different elements. The one that you do exist, the other that you have a right to exist. And because Jews had for so long been petitioning the neighbors who were so hostile for so many years, so many decades, for some kind of peace, our side was always quiet, happy to get what they could. The same way that we had agreed to a very truncated version of a Jewish state by accepting the partition plan Resolution 181 at the United Nations, which literally would just afforded a sliver of land for Israel. We're just happy to be loved. We're happy to exist. And we're happy when all of a sudden people tell us that they like us or love us or tolerate us. That's the first piece I think that we will address. The second one is, and you mentioned it, and every time that I've been with you, it is the end game. It's the two-state solution. As I often refer to when I write or when I do the radio show, it's a two-state illusion. It's a two-state delusion. It's absolutely nonsensical. The more remarkable thing is, speaking today as opposed to yesteryear, is post-October 7th. If there's one lesson that one would have thought was learned from October 7th, was that the notion of a two-state delusion would have been buried forever. And exactly the opposite has happened. Exactly the opposite has happened. The world, the United States, when I say the United States, I'm talking about the United States government. The people in America have been very supportive of Israel, generally speaking. The American administration has been, and I have denied the designation, and other people, other writers have spoken about, that the United States, that the Biden administration has been a hindrance, or it's been an obstacle to Israel winning the war. I've said from day one that the United States will be, and they have proven to be, Israel, I'm talking about the Biden administration now, is Israel's enemy. Is Israel's enemy. And it's remarkable that the United States, the Biden administration, we saw it last week with Blinken, we saw it 2 days ago with Jake Sullivan, who are the real mouthpieces. These are the people, these are the puppeteers behind the puppet who occupy 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. They have long believed in two things which were detrimental to Israel's very existence. The one is, and we've spoken about it before, the fact that they have no problem with the Iranians advancing the creation of a nuclear military capability, have always been on that fast track. And the other was that they believed that a Palestinian state needed to come into being. And it's remarkable that these so-called friends of Israel have actually taken advantage of the situation and are using it to pressure Israel, in order to try and force this second Palestinian state. Jordan, of course, is the first Palestinian state. And when just one last comment, and then we'll continue with an exchange, is all of a sudden some people who fashion themselves to be strong advocates of Israel are realizing, as you mentioned in your opening comments, that Egypt is not a friend. Egypt is a foe. That was known in Israel months ago. Israel was supposed to have gone to Rafah as that last part of trying to take control of Gaza 5 months ago. And they were retarded in their attempts to do so. And the party that was responsible for arresting Israel's plans was, of course, the Biden administration. We now know definitively what we sort of knew as an open secret before. The reason that the United States is absolutely adamant, even today, that Israel does not go into Rafah is because it will expose what is, as I said, an open secret, no longer a secret, that the Egyptians have been facilitating the Hamas attacks on Israel, not just for the last 7 months, for a long, long time. The Egyptians are fraudulent friends. Israel was always boasting about the fact that it has so many friends. In fact, one of the complaints that I had lodged, I think a couple of times on the podcast with you, was this notion that Bibi would try to sell us when the Camp David, when the there it is, another mistake, Camp David Oslo, when the Abraham Accords happened in September of 2020, all of a sudden Bibi was announcing to the world, but especially to his own constituents, because he wanted to be reelected, that Israel was now a country that was accepted by so many in the world. Israel was loved. Peace and prosperity had come to the Middle East. And it was a fraudulent lie. First of all, there was no peace. The arrangements that Israel made with a couple of the countries that we know, the UAE, Bahrain, and others, it was a normalization of relations. There was no peace. But the more remarkable thing was, and I've used this quite extensively in trying to make a very simple point, there have been since then over 44 or 45 UN resolutions condemning Israel on various issues. Israel-Palestinian relations, as they call it, the quest for a Palestinian state. And in each of these resolutions, every single one, the Arab world, the moderate Muslim world, the Gulf states, every single one have voted against Israel in every single case. In fact, because we're talking about Egypt, since the peace treaty with Egypt in 1979, in over 140 UN resolutions condemning Israel over the Palestine issue, which is a fraudulent issue, Egypt has only voted with Israel once, only once, and it was an issue that had nothing to do with the Palestinians. It was for a UN development plan about having some kind of control with space, with satellites in space, that they should not be used for war. And Israel wanted to sign on as a signature, and the Egyptians agreed with Israel. That was in November of 2015. Other than that, Egypt has voted against Israel in every single case. And as a last point, the more recent one was, of course, about 10 days ago, when there was a UN resolution calling for the creation of a Palestinian state, in the sense of, let's take the next step, let's affirm that Palestine should be given, the Palestinian entity that doesn't exist should be given some kind of full status at the United Nations. The vote against Israel was 143 to 9, with 25 abstaining. And if you want to look at who Israel's friends are and aren't, go look at that list. Of the 8 countries other than Israel that voted with Israel, those 8 countries, 4 of them had Micronesia, Papua New Guinea, Palua, these are the countries. Every country that Israel pretends is a friend. In the European Union, the countries that they've signed these agreements of an agreement of recognition of each other and so on and so forth, the UAE, they all vote against Israel. So this pretense that Israel has friends should have been put to rest a long time ago. But what we've exposed, as you addressed in your opening, the tunnels which have been used by Egypt to facilitate the Hamas efforts, is an absolute demonstrative point that Egypt is in fact an enemy. Just one last thing. I have a 14-year-old grandson who actually wrote me yesterday, and he said, when he saw the subject of this podcast's discussion, and he said, I always thought that Egypt didn't like Hamas. And he was sort of basically right. They don't, because Hamas is the Muslim Brotherhood, and the Egyptian government, certainly this government, al-Sisi, remembers 2011 to 2012, when Mubarak was deposed, and when Morsi from the Muslim Brotherhood, Egypt had in fact become a Muslim Brotherhood state in 2012. Egypt hates Hamas. But the arrangement that we have now, and one can't hide it anymore, is that the Egyptians basically told Hamas, we will cooperate with you as long as your guns point in the other direction, as long as they point east at Israel. And that's the situation we found ourselves in today.
So we have these 3 countries right now that are recognizing a state of Palestine. They haven't delineated their borders. They haven't said that right now. But let's just say, for argument's sake, they say it's Gaza, it's Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. Let's say that that's what they say. The Arabs in Gaza overwhelmingly support October 7th, and overwhelmingly cling on to what they call the right of return. The exact same situation with the Arabs in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank.
80%. I read it today.
So So here we have a situation where it's not a state living side by side in any kind of a peace. It's a state wanting to build up, and with the assistance of additional tunnels and arms being supplied again by Iran through various means, certainly to Judea and Samaria, that would come through Jordan. Okay, so there's isolation happening with Israel. What should be the position of the Israeli government? I hear the position very clear from Netanyahu, but I don't think it's accepted by all parties across the board. Certainly on the far left, it isn't. But what also the position for, I'm seeing organizations on the left here in the United States and in Canada, J-Space Canada and J Street, that are embracing the idea of a state of Palestine.
Yeah, actually, I will sort of take to task the way that you describe Bibi's position being clear. Well,
Yep.
We seem to think that it's clear, but it really isn't, and I'll tell you why. When this war, when Israel, people have to remember the timeline. October 7th was when this terrible massacre, this pogrom, this mini Holocaust happened.
Right.
The Israeli army didn't go into Gaza until October 28th. When Israel went in, there was only one word that was used and various versions of that word to describe what Israel's intentions were. It was to destroy Hamas. That was the word that was used everywhere. It was the universal, to destroy Hamas. Now, there were other words that we used which were synonyms, to eradicate, to lick, whatever, but it was to destroy Hamas. When it all of a sudden became apparent that the Western world wasn't as supportive of Israel as was expected, other than the fraudulent lip service, the type given initially by Blinken and Biden, and all of a sudden the language changed, and even Bibi himself no longer spoke about destroying Hamas. He started talking about defeating Hamas, which is a very different thing. Completely. And only about 4 days ago, I watched a press conference that he'd given in Israel, and he was complaining about the fact that there were pressures placed against Israel not to go into Rafah. And he said, we don't expect our friends to prevent us from doing the right thing, which is to strike against Hamas. So here it is, Mayor. We have this shift from destroying Hamas to defeating Hamas to we have the right to strike against Hamas, to remove them from the ability to do us harm. And one just has to look, language is quite important, and one just has to look at that. Bibi, in a press conference that he held a week before that, actually said something which might have been perhaps even more disturbing. And he said, the United States, the Western world, has to understand, we can't afford to lose this war. My God. I mean, parse that language. We can't afford to lose this war. The war should have been one in which we destroy Hamas. And not only Hamas. When I say Hamas, let me clarify. Anyone and everyone who either encouraged Hamas, voted for Hamas, supported Hamas, or praised Hamas. And we've seen what the polls show. There have been 4 definitive polls done by Palestinian polling surveys, significant ones, out of Ramallah, out of a couple of the universities, in which they polled the Palestinian people, the ones who are fraudulently called innocent civilians. They're not civilians and they're not innocent. They are combatants against the Jewish people. And the polls showed overwhelmingly, to the tune of 81, 84, 87%, that they supported what happened on October 7th. And the most significant of all was a poll which was done, which showed that 98% said they were made more proud as Palestinians because of the slaughter of Jews. I just want to throw this in as a footnote also. We were talking about Egypt and Egypt's role, because that's sort of the subject matter as well. Let's not forget, and anyone who knows anything about Israel, that Gaza was in fact occupied for 19 years by Egypt.
Right.
Between 1948 and 1967, Gaza was occupied by Egypt, the same way that Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, was occupied by Jordan. And during those 19 years, there wasn't an editorial written, there wasn't a lecture given by an Arab professor anywhere, there wasn't a demonstration at any Ivy League university calling for the establishment of a Palestine. It was Egypt and it was Jordan, and no one gave a damn. It was only when all of a sudden Israel, in a defensive war in 1967, takes control of the territories that all of a sudden the Arabs realized that they needed to create a personality, a Palestinian personality, so they could make claim for two things. One, reason why they're always engaged in war in Israel, and two, reason that Israel needed to be defeated. So our side has been so guilty. I know you and I have spoken privately many times, Mayor. Our side has been so guilty of being overly careful not to say anything which appears to be bombastic, that the enemy wants us dead, that the enemy is genocidal, that the only genocide that we speak about in the Middle East is the genocide that's found both in the Charter of Hamas 1988 or the Charter of the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, which has been cosmetically changed to the Palestinian Authority. And I will end at least this piece with this sentence. We all know that the American plan is, they've made no bones about it, they're shoving it down Israel's throat, that the only solution is to have a Palestine with the Palestinian Authority, which has a pay-for-slave program, which still calls for the eradication of Israel, that they somehow be the party that governs Gaza in confederation with what they do in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, and this will be their Palestine. There was a comment that was made by an official spokesman of the PA 3 days ago, Mahmoud al-Habash. And his comment was that we, of the Palestinian Authority, mind you, of the Palestinian Authority, we are prepared, if we don't get Palestine, and we know where they expect Palestine to be, to launch another 100 October 7th. And that came from the Palestinian Authority. Israel needs to recognize a very simple fact that they could have recognized 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 40 years ago, and 70 years ago. They stand alone. And Israel needs to do what Israel needs to do to survive and damn the world.
The Biden administration, they continuously lecture Israel, and they say, we want a plan for the day after. I don't think there's any country during a period of war who has been lectured and say, we need your plan for the day after.
Yeah.
Why is there this fixation on Israel the day after? What is that?
Because we're suckers. There's never been a case in the history of recorded man where one nation, while at war, or one people, while at war with another, has actually supplied its enemy with supplies, with medicine, makes available its hospitals for the families of the terrorists who, in fact, were the architects of this war against Israel. It's a terrible thing to say. On the one hand, we talk about a chosen people. On the other hand, we are a demented people in which we try to push buttons thinking that if we somehow push the right button, the world will come to like us. My God, how many lessons of history does one need in order for them to understand we need to do what's best for us? And if the question is asked of these humanitarians, these so-called humanitarians, are the lives of our children more valuable than the lives of our enemies? Absolutely. Absolutely. Their children are the ones who are being raised, and they do become the terrorists who ultimately do kill our children. Yes, our children, let's be unabashed about this. The lives of our children are significantly more important than the lives of theirs. And we should not be afraid to say it. And yet we are. The Israeli government keeps talking every time that the CNN microphone is placed in front of the spokesman for Israel. They talk about the humanitarian assistance that Israel wants to give. We want this. And Israel is making the biggest mistake of all. I've lectured on this extensively. I wrote an op-ed. It was also published in Israel National News and everything else. And I think the biggest mistake that Israel is making is that Israel has now played into this trap that the United States and others have set. And that trap is that we have gone along with them pretending that Hamas and the Palestinians are not the same thing. And you've heard the phrase, does Hamas represent the Palestinians? Do the Palestinians really support Hamas? The answer is damn right they do, and damn right they are. But we have taken the bait, it's a trap, and we will pay a serious price for it. The moment that you say that Hamas is evil and bad, but the Palestinians whom they govern and whom they govern by right of the Palestinians having placed them there, the moment that you say that these people are innocent, that these people are civilians, well, let's take a look at the day after. If in fact Hamas ceases to be, why would Israel then not turn Gaza over to the other victims of Hamas, the poor Palestinians? This notion of a poor Palestinian needs to be buried, and people need to stop listening to the Pierce Morgans who says, okay, let's listen to the Jewish position, explain to us why you think it's wrong that you were massacred, and let's go to the other side and let's talk to someone from Hamas who's going to explain to us why it was necessary to massacre Jews. This notion of a moral equivalence is perverted. There's a pathological disorder for anyone who even allows that discussion to take place. And you mentioned just in passing a few minutes before about our rabbi, the rabbi. He's the only person who, if a microphone was placed in front of him, would not be ashamed to say what I had just said a few minutes before, that our children do matter and theirs don't. That the only humanitarian concern we have is for our people and not for the enemy.
Right.
And yet, no Israel, none, no, even the so-called right wing in Israel is a little careful, not wanting to be ostracized and saying, well, as long as we're being attacked, well, we have to take this position. There's nothing to be apologetic about. This is not a war of territory. We've said that 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times. This is a religious war. It's a war that was launched by their side against ours. And there's only one cardinal rule for warfare. You need to win. You need to win at every and all costs. That's it. Is that simple?
Is there anyone in the government of Israel that takes a moderate position, let's say, and says, for the possibility of something good happening for tomorrow is to round up the entire Hamas network infrastructure in Gaza and expel them, so that there could be a little bit of normalcy going on? Is there anyone in the government that says anything like that?
In government, the answer is no. In government. Now, the government has been perverted. They created this thing called the war cabinet, then putting in the war cabinet a couple of diehard leftists when it comes to the politics. Let's just talk about one, Benny Gantz.
Right.
To give some credit for the one right-wing party in Israel that has taken to task the types of things that you and I talk about, but very careful because they've been vilified as they do it, was the Otzmat Yehudit party, of course, with Itamar Ben-Gvir. He has basically said the right thing. Benny Gantz was interviewed, I think it was CNN, it was a week ago, and he was talking about how embarrassed he is that Itamar Ben-Gvir even is allowed to be part of the Israeli government, that he's allowed to be in the Knesset. Mind you, he never criticizes the Arabs in Knesset. And he basically came out and referred to him as an infantile, immature person who doesn't understand politics. And I'll talk about Benny Gantz's version of politics. Benny Gantz comes out, Itamar Ben-Gvir responded with a tweet on X, which was a lovely one. I have it here someplace. And in it, he says, I'm being lectured to by Benny Gantz. You mean Benny Gantz, when he was chief of staff, who admitted that he sacrificed his own Golani soldiers in an excursion in 2014 into Gaza, risked his own soldiers' lives in order not to have collateral damage against Arabs when they were shelling Israeli towns from the hospitals in. This is the Benny Gantz who invited in December, just a few months ago in December, invited Mahmoud Abbas, known in Israel, of course, as Abu Mazen, invited him to his home and greeted him with all the fanfare that an honored guest will get. This is a mass murderer of Jews. And Benny Gantz invites, you think Benny Gantz would ever invite Itamar Ben-Gvir for a cup of tea? My God. So Itamar attacked him, and rightly so, and said, I'm being lectured to by this clown who has sacrificed everything in Israel. And the reason, by the way, that the United States has taken such an openly hostile, the United States government, such an openly hostile position against Israel is because of the Benny Gantzes and the Yair Lapids of the world. They are the ones, all the demonstrations that took place in Israel prior to October 7th over judicial reform, and even since, Yair Lapid was on television the other day vilifying Bibi Netanyahu. Benny Gantz has done the same thing while sitting in the war cabinet with him. They demonize him with one reason, or for one reason, because they want him deposed so they can somehow take control of the Israeli government. Well, what's really remarkable is, why are we so surprised that the Western world, that Ireland, Norway, and Spain all of a sudden have taken this strong position against Israel, calling for a Palestinian state that they want to recognize? Why wouldn't they, if after all, the person who they hope and assume is going to be the next prime minister of Israel, Benny Gantz, is going to be the person who they can deal with? Why? Because he himself vilifies his own country. He's exactly the stooge that they want. And the moment that Benny Gantz and Yair Lapid and the others, Eisenkot and quite a list of the generals who believe in this notion of a Camp David which morphed into Oslo that can be used to serve Israel, it's the diplomatic tool with which Israel is defeated. And Benjamin Netanyahu's legacy having been destroyed already for eternity, if he has any common sense, if he has a shred of Zionist Jewish spirit in him, will stand up, do the right thing at this 11th hour. Damn the world. Damn the world. History, future history, will recognize your accomplishments. But when you play the game that's where the table has been set by these people in Israel and outside of Israel, you're going to lose. And right now, and it's a terrible thing for me to say, I've been a proponent of the state of Israel for, well, as long as I've been alive. I understood human nature for as long as I've been alive. My parents, both Holocaust survivors, taught me at a very, very, very early stage about human nature. And they also, my father told me when I was 5 years old, he said, if you ever expect any justice for the Jew in this world, you'll be disappointed. It's not going to happen. Well, remarkable that the people running for the leadership of Israel seem not to understand it. They are political prostitutes, and we need to expose them. It's that simple. We need to expose them. And instead, we become the naysayers. All of a sudden, we become anti-peace. We're the Chamberlain was the peace person. Churchill was the anti-peace person. He was the warmonger. We've learned no lesson, Mayor. We've learned no lesson of yesteryear. None. In fact, I talked to you just for a few minutes before we went on air, and I mentioned that I quickly went into my research I have a remarkable repository of information. And I found, I looked specifically for it. It didn't take me long to find. Others can find it if they wish. There was the attack on a terrible terrorist attack in Tel Aviv against the Dolphinarium. There was a nightclub disco in 2001, and 20 people were killed. 16 of them were teenagers. Most of the teenagers were girls. They were murdered, butchered by a suicide bomber. And Sharon, Ariel Sharon, the hawk, the so-called hawk, gave a speech on national television in which he basically talked about the tragedy and said, and he actually used the phrase, that we aren't going to respond to every act of terrorism, which was shocking, because this is one of the more horrid terrorist attacks that had occurred. And he said, it'll be a demonstration. I've got the speech right here. And he said, it'll be a demonstration that restraint is a measure of strength. Restraint is a measure of strength, that the enemy knows that we're strong. And then I pulled out another speech, which was given in June of 2000. On June 1st, there was another terrorist attack. There were a terrorist suicide attack. And by the way, the terrorist attack of 2001 committed by a Hamas terrorist. 2002, once again, he comes out with the same thing, and he's quoted extensively. Restraint is strength. We demonstrate our power, Sharon said, by not responding to Arab terrorism. So October 7th didn't begin October 7th. It began with the fraudulent ceasefires that Israel allowed to happen. And we've spoken about this on this show. A ceasefire in 2009, a ceasefire in 2012, ceasefire in 2014, a ceasefire in 2021. Ceasefire, ceasefire, ceasefire. The Sharon speech, ironically enough, speaking of ceasefire, he's actually quoted as saying that he wants, at the time Arafat was still alive, he's trying to convince Arafat, please, we need a ceasefire. The way of the future, we need a ceasefire. If there's one thing that Israel doesn't need, is a ceasefire. What Israel needs is a lot of dead Hamas people and a lot of dead Hamas supporters. And when Piers Morgan asks how many they are, as he loves to do, this numbers game, well, how many of you died and how many of you have you killed? My answer would have been, when he said, and how many of you killed? My answer would have been, not nearly enough. Not nearly enough.
Absolutely. If Israel is to pull out now from Gaza, and let's say they pull out of Judea and Samaria as well, the West Bank, can you imagine?
No, I can't imagine. In fact, I can't, with all due respect, Mayor, and I know you and I share a common view of the world because we have common sense. I can't imagine that Israel is prosecuting the war right now, as we speak, the way that it's prosecuting it. I simply cannot understand it. If I was having a debate with someone and argued my point, and they were arguing the opposite point, the Yair Lapids, the Benny Gantz, and so on and so forth, the one question I would ask them is, and what have we gained through restraint? What have we gained through restraint? And I just want to, for fear that I might forget, allow me to mention one more thing. It's an important comment that I want to make. In 1978, I had a position with the Jewish establishment in Arizona. And because of my expertise on Middle East affairs in Israel, because I spoke Hebrew and such, anytime that some dignitary, some VIP from Israel would come to deliver some kind of lecture, I was always the one who was given time, a day, 2 days, sometimes 3 days with that person, sort of shepherding them around and talking and everything else before their speech or before their several speeches. And I gained quite a lot of insight having met some of these people, some of them who I liked and some of them, of course, who I didn't like. But there's one that I want to mention in light of what you said to me about what happens if Israel pulls out of Gaza. And I'll give you the answer right now. The head of the Israeli Air Force, the commander of the Israeli Air Force, the IAF, in the Yom Kippur War was Benny Peled. Benny Peled was a brilliant commander of the Air Force. He was the one who, as I said, was in charge. Also fought in '67, but he was the one. In fact, he was in the Israeli Air Force in 1948-49, when my father, 3 years after he was liberated from the concentration camps, was in the Israeli Air Force. So Benny Peled, I meet Benny Peled. We're having a brunch together, whatever. And I asked him what his position was on the territories that Israel had taken in 1967. I asked him what his position was about Israel returning the territories, as the Western world had tried to pressure them to do. And Benny Peled said to me, and I'll never forget it, he said, I'm not going to tell you what my position is on territories, whether or not Israel should return them or not return them. And he was talking about the territories that were taken post-67, talking about Judea and Samaria, okay, talking about the Golan Heights, and you're talking about Gaza. And he said, but I will tell you this, as a commander of soldiers who I often send off to battle knowing that they will die, the one thing that you cannot expect me to do is send a soldier to battle knowing that he's going to die and knowing that after he's dead, Israel is going to give up the very territory that he died for. My God, talk about making common sense. In Hebrew, there's an expression, Simon Nafal. All of a sudden it rings, and he said, I'll do whatever I need to do. If we keep these territories as ours, then the soldier needs to fight to preserve it. But to send a soldier to fight for territory that he knows is going to be given up it's a moral obscenity. And he's right. And that speaks to what's going on today. Imagine today, when you and I finish this podcast, I'm going to go turn on the news from Israel, and tragically, I'm going to find out that another soldier or 2 or 4 died. Right. To think that they died while the Israeli government is being pressured by the Western world to give up what they died for, that cannot be allowed.
Right.
That is an immoral position. It is also an anti-Jewish position, and I don't give a damn about the Pierce Morgans of this world.
100%. 100%. I'm asked by a lot of Jews in my community. They're asking me about. They say, okay, so there's some Jews in Israel that are saying we should settle in Gaza. What's your perspective on that? So I said, well, on the one hand, I'm for Jews settling in Gaza. On the other hand, it has to come with a condition. What is that condition? We have to tear down and expel the entire Hamas infrastructure as a start, at least. So I could feel that the Jews who are moving into Gaza are somewhat protected. And then they take me on that. What are you talking about? The entire infrastructure. You're talking about expelling so many. What? Someone that has a book for Hamas? Somebody? I said anyone who was supportive. I said, let me clarify it. Anyone who was supportive of the October 7th slaughter of Israelis. We'll start with that. Well, how could you do that? That's my position.
And we know the position. In fact, here, allow me, as you were speaking, I just quickly pulled up. This is a speech that Sharon gave on June 3rd of 2001. This is after the Dolphinarium thing. And the quote here, restraint is a sign of our strength. But I just want to read you one, it's 2 sentences. Here's what the Prime Minister Sharon said in 2001. We're talking about 23 years ago.
Yep.
And I read, the Prime Minister blamed the recent spate of attacks on the Palestinian Authority, but at the same time said that it was his responsibility to restore security to the citizens of Israel. And I quote him, this is a quote, open quote, the Palestinian Authority is responsible for the attacks, for everything. I'm responsible for fighting this difficult battle. The responsibility is on my shoulders. And how did that turn out, Mr. Sharon? How did that turn out? You're long gone. You are long gone, and the Palestinian Authority is still murdering Jews. How did that restraint turn out? Do we learn any of the lessons of history? Asked and answered.
One more point. Let me throw this in, that I believe the Minister of Defense, when Israel gave up the Sinai, was Ariel Sharon. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, Sharon. I mean, obviously his role in Israeli history is not to be denied. As a general, as a military person.
100%. 100%.
As a military person, brilliant, wonderful. In fact, part of the reason that Israel won the Yom Kippur War, which they weren't supposed to win, when the Egyptians, let's put it in perspective, when the American guaranteed that the Egyptians wouldn't attack proved to be absolutely rubbish, the person who helped save Israel was Sharon. And as I mention this, it's important that I throw in a footnote that too many others completely forget. Some don't even know. Israel didn't just pull out of the Sinai 2.5 times the size of Israel proper after, because of the Camp David Accords, which we spoke about, which were begun in 78, 79 was when they were formulated, signed, and by 1982, in April of 82, Israel was out of the Sinai. And people talk about the fact that Israel made these sacrifices, they pulled out of the Sinai. The Sinai that Israel took in the Yom Kippur War. Had people forgotten, in the 67 war, had people forgotten that in 1956, Israel also in the Sinai campaign also took over the Sinai? And because of pressures from America, the president, and his Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles. John Foster Dulles, Israel pulled out in March of 1957. I'm telling you right now, Jake Sullivan doesn't even know that. He doesn't even know that. Israel pulled out in 1957 with a guarantee by America that the Sinai would be demilitarized, that Egypt would not be a threat, they would not blockade the Straits of Tiran, and so on and so forth, the Gulf of Aqaba. Well, by the time that the Egyptians decided to violate that promise, Eisenhower was not on the turf anymore. No, it was John Foster Dulles. It was another president, and Israel was indeed attacked. So for us to be told by the Biden is a baked potato living at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. It's his team of foreign policy people, every single one, we've named them before, every single one an anti-Semite. And in a case or two, a Jewish anti-Semite. And in each of these cases, these are the people who say, we're going to demilitarize Gaza so it's not a threat to you. Thank you. No, thank you.
It's 100%. There's and they're dangling. Don't you Jews want this normalization agreement with what a word, normalization agreement with Saudi Arabia?
Yeah. And by the way, that in itself is a completely fraudulent argument. And our people who are supposed to be guiding us are deliberately misguiding us. The Saudis have said time and again that their peace is predicated on what was once called, when it was first formulated in 2002, the Saudi Peace Initiative. It was later renamed the Arab Peace Initiative. And there are several conditions. They can be broken down into 4 categories. And those categories are the establishment of Palestine, the establishment of Palestine, which would be Judenreich, no Jews. The establishment of Palestine based on what? The June 4th, 1967 borders. The repatriation, to repatriate all the Palestinians who fled, who were told to leave it, and so on and so forth. This is the this is the Saudi condition for peace with normalization with Israel.
So, Mayor, this Palestine state is Jew-free, no Jews living there.
Exactly.
And we have 2 million Arabs living in the state of Israel.
Yeah.
And somehow they're looking at us with a straight face and what's wrong with that?
Israel's response to Saudi Arabia should be what it was for the last 2 or 3 years. If you trust that the United States is going to take care of Iran as they threaten your existence, that's a great visual right there.
Right.
If you think that the United States is going to protect you from Iran, the very country that the United States is in bed with, when I say United States, I'm talking about the United States Biden administration. If you think it's not going to happen, they will betray you. The only country that could come to your rescue when it comes to Iran is not the country that gave Iran $110 billion, the US. It's Israel. There is a thing, it's called a quid pro quo. Mordechai Kadar wrote a wonderful piece, I think it was in 2017, and he said 10 rules for negotiating with Saudi Arabia. And they were wonderful. You can find them, I'm sure people want to look it up. It's a great piece.
Right.
But he was basically saying, what we will give you in exchange for peace is peace. Is peace. You want us to recognize Riyadh as the capital of Saudi Arabia? You recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Jerusalem. And so on and so forth. And he listed 10 of them. Anytime we don't do it, I've used this expression in your program many times, and I'll use it. I realize that the clock ticks and almost time to close. There is this myth of Jewish intelligence, which I'd mentioned that my father taught me a little about the Middle East and about human nature when I was a very, very, very young guy. I'm an older guy right now, much older. And the same lesson that I was taught then, which at its own level I sort of understood, I fully understand now. It's a shame that our leaders, and maybe that's a misnomer, it's a real shame that our leaders don't understand that. Tragic shame.
Mayor, quick point before we sign off. So Iran, either they have the atomic bomb right now, or they're very close to obtaining nuclear arms. And obviously, they will want to supply their proxies, Hezbollah in the north, and Hamas, and whatever groups they have in Judea and Samaria. They want to supply them with small components of a nuclear bomb in order to completely destroy Israel. We just saw Iran fired over 300 missiles at Israel, and the hand of God stopped it. And we just saw over the weekend that helicopter was transporting the president and the foreign minister of Iran. And again, the hand of God with there's a joke running around that it was pilot helicopter.
Helicopter. Yeah.
But God sends these signs to the Jewish people, but we have to do what we have to do. They want to transport nuclear bombs to their proxies. Why are their proxies allowed to remain there? They shouldn't be there.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I want to tell you, my level of optimism was terribly punctured when, in the aftermath of the 300 rocket missiles that were launched at Israel, and by the way, there was a fraudulent report of how many the United States actually had a hand in bringing down. It was infinitesimal. It was a joke. But nonetheless, putting that aside, it was Israel's arrow that was actually the most successful. But the remarkable thing is that Israel, once again, caved into Western pressure when Israel struck Iran, and they struck in areas close to installations. That was a sign right there that every Arab and every Muslim, because the Iranians, of course, are not Arabs, they're Muslims, that they understood, which is Israel has in essence been handcuffed by the Americans. If Israel ever had reason and license to destroy as much of the military infrastructure of Iran that they could, that was the opportunity. But what did Israel do? Israel said, look how close We can
Right.
strike Iran. Look how close we are, which was an echo of what I said about 15 minutes ago. It's almost like saying restraint is a demonstration of our strength. No, it's a demonstration of your insanity. That's what it is.
Absolutely. 100%.
Yeah.
Mayor, listen, thank you very much for joining us. I know you have more work to do this evening, but thank you very much. And, you know, we'll have you on possibly next week, the week after. We'll set it up. Every single day, there's another crisis going on affecting Israel and the Jewish people worldwide. So absolutely, we'll do it again. But thank you very much. And again, to all our viewers and supporters, please share this, get it across. We'll get the message out there. And let's just end by saying Kahana Sadek. What else could we say?
Hey, Mayor, something we did last time, which I think is worthy. We have over 200 people watching right now. So I think take a minute. Let me just put on some of the chats that people had sent in messages and things. And then,
okay, quickly.
Just a few seconds. We'll do it quickly. And then I'm going to close with Hatikva. People can sign out if they want. We always like to close with that. But just so you know, people are just enjoying the show. You know, just thank yous and just being supportive of the fact that we're doing this.
Any questions from anyone? Maybe Mayor could answer a question.
I do want to make one comment. This is a show that they should not be enjoying.
Well,
this is
let me rephrase it. Enjoying your knowledge and your database, and not enjoying the fact. But, you know, I think you did mention quickly also, the United Nations gave a moment of silence to the person who is the butcher of Tehran, and America stood by and joined in the moment of silence. That was, I mean, just mind-boggling to me. I mean,
again, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Okay, bye. I mean, absolutely incredible. Okay, so let's see what else.
Were there any questions from any of the viewers?
No, should be a crime. No, basically, you answered the questions before they asked them.
Okay.
But there are a lot of comments, which just shows we need to keep doing this show. I appreciate everybody watching, and you guys. Okay. So somebody named Mayor said there's so many mayors. So there's a mayor watching Mayor and Mayor. So that's, to me, it's a nightmare. Somebody wants to know, when will Norway be sending its ambassador to Rafah? That's a good question. So there's a question for you. And on most of them are just comments and support. So there you go. Okay, kids and guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
And then we'll sign out.
Perfect.
So he's gone. We're here. Let's go to this and to this. And then there we go.
יהודי הומייה ולפתן מזרח קדימה עין לציון צופיה עוד לא עמדה תקוותנו